Welcome to Module 3.2, Human-Centered Design. In this module, we'll be exploring human-centered design, which is a creative methodology and approach for user voice during a design or development phase of a product, service or tool, or fund. In the context of user voice, this involves mapping out all the different types of users you want to engage with and learn from. These users could include key players across the social investment ecosystem or a diverse group of end users with similar needs. There are four fundamental principles of human-centered design, according to design thinking thought leader Don Norman. They are: understand and address the core problem. Solve the fundamental underlying issues, not the symptoms. You can do this by beginning your research with field studies and observations of actual practice. Get to the bottom of why there is an issue in the first place. Determine that to locate the core problem. Secondly, be people-centered. People-centered means considering all the people who are involved in the product or service you are delivering for. It's important to focus on the needs and abilities of people and take into account of any relevant details that might influence your decision-making, such as history, culture, beliefs, and environment of the community. Thirdly, activity-centered systems approach. When it comes to product or design or service, look at the activity in its entirety from start to finish. Review the whole process and journey and not in isolated parts. And finally, rapid iteration of prototyping and testing. Instead of taking the approach of finding the perfect solution with complex, drawn-out strategies and timelines, it would be far more time, research, and cost-effective to run quick, rapid trials to determine if you're on the right track or if you need to pivot. Being agile and mobile to respond to feedback from your users and iterate to improve the next design is key. What is design thinking and the double diamond? Design thinking using the double diamond is an iterative process that is rooted in understanding users, challenging assumptions, developing, prototyping, and iterating products or services based on that understanding. The double diamond design process is a widely used methodology for identifying a problem and developing a solution. This diagram, produced by the Design Council, is called the double diamond, which is a visual representation of a design process that is accessible to all types of users. It consists of two diamonds, demonstrating the stages of exploring and addressing a problem comprehensively and then taking focused action to solve it. It helps you to identify problems for a user that you have identified. Then choose the specific problems that you are best placed to find solutions. The solution is then tested with users and iterated based on the user feedback at every stage of development. There are 4 steps to undergo design thinking double diamond process. Firstly, discover. The first diamond represents the initial stage where the emphasis is on gaining a deep understanding of the problem. This involves engaging with and spending time with the people directly affected by the issues at hand. Secondly, define. The insights gathered during the discovery phase help redefine and clarify the problem statement. It encourages looking at the challenge from different perspectives. Thirdly, develop. The second diamond encourages creative thinking and generating diverse solutions for the well-defined problem. It involves seeking inspiration from various sources and collaborating with different individuals. And finally, deliver. Delivery is the phase where solutions are tested at a small scale. It includes discarding ideas that don't work and refining those that do. Key points. This process is not strictly linear, as indicated by the arrows in the diagram. Users may find themselves returning to earlier stages as they learn more about the underlying issues or encounter unexpected challenges. Early stage idea generation can also be a part of the discovery phase. No idea is ever considered finished. Therefore, there is a continuous feedback loop, and iterative improvements are essential to refine and improve the idea. Next, we'll be hearing more about human-centered design from Shift Design, a design charity, and how this approach has been used to understand and design solutions to real-world problems.
My name is Duncan. I work for a shared design charity called Shift, which I help co-run with my co-lead. And Shift is a design charity that tries to put people in the lead of social change by trying to demonstrate a new model for communities really driving social change in this country and leading on what decisions in terms of how that might happen on the ground at grassroots level. I'll be talking about one sort of problem-solving methodology that anyone can use called human-centered design, which is a type of user voice practice that allows you to design new solutions, typically involving humans throughout the process in order to solve those solutions. User voice is fundamental to anything that we do at Shift, but I'd probably break that down into sort of three key areas or focus areas for the organization. The first is, how do we really deeply understand how an experience of a social issue is showing up for different humans, particularly in this country or across the UK. Anyone can experience a social issue very, very differently depending on who they are, where they live, and their own personal and familial and institutional experiences of that problem. So the reason why we care about that is not just to understand that issue, it's so that we can better understand how we can better solve and tackle that issue, working with those individuals and really understanding from their perspective and their points of views what types of products and services, built environments, events, spaces they want to be in that are actually going to meet their needs. And then the third thing that I think is really, really essential around user voice and why we care about it so much is understanding how we need to change as a system and as a society to make sure that all types of individuals are represented in our products and services and institutions and spaces. We were recently tasked with understanding why unemployment was impacting those aged over 50 across the UK so much more than maybe other demographics across the UK, and that was a really interesting social problem for us to explore. And the first thing, again, that we wanted to do using user voice practice was understand that issue in a much deeper way. And so we engaged with over 50 older people in the West Midlands to understand a little bit more about their experiences of being made redundant. And then we used a range of sort of concepting and prototyping techniques to come towards a peer coaching model, which is actually a completely different way of thinking about how you might re-engage people into employment, actually allowing older people to support themselves and rebuild their confidence and rebuild their pathways into meaningful work that actually made sense for them. And so, that's just one example of how we co-designed a new service, working with people who actually experienced that social issue in a really deep way, in a way that they felt part of the project team, in a way that actually meant that whatever we did had a lot of credibility to what we were creating, because we knew that the people in the room were the ones who were actually going to be experiencing and using that service. Actually, that work has just been represented in a report by Demos as an example of good practice in the sector to support older people back into work. And I think that's a strong validation that we know it's working. And that's just one example of how we might use user voice at every stage of the type of work that we do at Shift. Yeah, so I think the first challenge that I'd flag is complexity of trying to design for social change and using user voice practices. I mean, we often talk about the range of different types of users that are out there, the different types of user needs and priorities and preferences and perspectives about a problem, a social issue, or even services that they experience, and how do you actually try and solve for something that can often be quite systemic. Yeah, so you navigate that complexity is really important. And I think one way of trying to navigate that complexity is firstly trying to understand who you're actually really trying to design for, what your priority is, and then making sure that you're actually designing for a real human. We can often design in the aggregate, which means that we're designing for many. And when you try and design for many, because you're trying to reach scale, there's a real risk that you actually design for no one, because you've lost throughout the process an ability to actually design for a very, very specific type of either individual or group that service or product actually needs to respond to, and the person you're actually trying to solve for. So that's the first thing I'd say, is how do you manage complexity? The second thing I'd say is around legitimacy. Like, who do you actually have legitimacy with the individuals that you're trying, the users, the people whose voice, and you're actually quite responsible for that voice in terms of how you platform that voice, how you understand that voice, how you interpret what they're saying. And one of the only ways that I've found that you can navigate and create legitimacy with those individuals, or whoever it is, and it's the same in any walk of life, is you have to build really strong relationships with those individuals. And then the third thing that I'd quickly just say is around accountability. So one of the challenges with sort of user voice is, how do you hold yourself accountable to actually continually representing those individuals in whatever decisions that you're actually making throughout the process. And it's really important that you have accountability mechanisms in place so that you can sense check actually with wherever you're getting to, whether you're on the right track and who you're on the right track for. And it's really easy for you to get lost in the noise when you're doing that. But really good, strict accountability mechanisms are essential. Well, firstly, I'd just take a step back and think about human-centered design, and then we can go into design thinking. So human-centered design is really about making sure that humans, whoever you're trying to solve for, or whoever has actually got experience of a social issue, is involved in actually trying to solve for that problem, is contributing at every stage in terms of providing perspective, opinion, and helping you to shape that solution, and really buying into the fact that actually by having a plurality of views and opinions, with real human experiences attached to that you'll be able to create much more meaningful, much more impactful solution. And design thinking is a process that you can use to try and embed human-centered design into your work. And the double diamond approach is just one of many methods you can use to utilize design thinking. And really what that is trying to get at is getting you outside of your own worldview and thinking about the problem from a different perspective and a different lens. So it asks you really to engage in a period and an immersion of discovery where you're trying to understand that social issue from a range of different perspectives, and then actually redefine and reframe how to consider what problem you're trying to solve, who you're trying to solve it, why you're trying to solve it, and why you're even the right individual or organization or institution to be solving that problem. Once you've done that, you actually want to try and develop some sort of solution that responds to it. So there's a process of zooming in and then zooming back out once you've actually got a problem. And typically the most important part of that is actually seeing what assumptions you've made from the transition between a problem set and a solution space. Back in, I want to say about 2012, Shift started what's been over a 10-year process of exploring the current food systems, particularly food systems in populous environments within the city, and trying to understand how we might change those food systems to feel more healthier, to give people more choice in terms of the types of food that they can actually access, and more affordable, so they can actually have good food that's affordable that people can actually purchase and engage with. And as part of that process, we used a human-centered design approach when we first started out, because we didn't really know enough about what was going on within the sort of food space and the built environment for food, particularly within the inner city of London. And we used a range of different observation techniques, ethnographies, to actually just really immerse ourselves in the world of what it's like to be in a lower income area, a neighborhood in London, and recorded just everything that we saw without trying to make any judgments, without trying to make any statements about what that might mean for different individuals, but really just trying to understand from other people's experiences, their daily lived experience of engaging with the food environment around them. And then we explored, using the human-centered design approach, how we might frame that challenge and think about solutions that would move towards maybe something that looked quite different. And throughout sort of 2015 through to up till last year, we then worked on a series of different prototypes to explore new ways of getting healthier, more nutritious food into different types of community groups across London. That there's something universal about taking a human-centered design approach, which really tries to get at the heart of understanding how humans experience the world. And I think that's really, really essential when you're exploring social issues, because typically those social issues exist because for whatever reason in our current environment, societies, there are just products and services and spaces that do not work and are not fit for purpose for a significant majority of the world. And that's quite a challenge. And human-centered design really tries to unpick, why is that happening and how is that happening? And it isn't focused on raw, hard data that is going to be shown up in reports. It really asks you to think about the human experience and your own human experience in engaging with a range of different products and services. And it really gets to the heart of our humanity in terms of how we want to show up in this world for others and show up in the world for ourselves, and what type of society we want to create. And I think that's a really important starting point when you're looking to tackle social issues, that you come from that place which is actually understanding your own position in this world and what kind of position you're in and what kind of bias you might be bringing to a space, and then trying to understand someone else's position in the world and their own perspectives, and what the implications are in terms of how social issues show up for people differently. The first thing I would say is typically know who you're actually designing for. And if you're designing for investors and the investment community, then be really honest about that, and be really transparent about who you're actually designing for, and therefore what the design constraints actually are when you're trying to create design elements for communities. The second thing I would say is know your own needs, because it's really important to be transparent around the limitations that you actually have. The final thing I'd say is be really, really clear on the one outcome that you're actually trying to achieve when you're designing for end users and communities, and actually measure that, and only measure that. It's really easy to try and measure a range of different things because you think that they're all important. But for example, if you're trying to design for access, decide what your one clear indicator of increasing access is going to look like and who you're trying to increase access for, and then make sure, if your design is only going to do one thing, make sure it actually does the thing that you've intended it to do. And I think that's really essential. And then finally, actually, just on this, I would say the other thing is understand that you have to get as close to the communities and as close to the problem as possible if you're really going to actually understand it. And a lot of that is actually taking time to build community relationships and build trust. And sometimes you just won't ever build that, and it won't be you that's actually appropriate to design new services or new types of support. So actually, who else should you be interacting with across the ecosystem of support services within the civic space to actually create new solutions that could work for the social investment sector? The first thing is, at an organisational level, we've had to adapt our own organisational structure, our leadership, to try and be able to do this work more effectively and more legitimately with different individuals and groups. And that looks like challenging hierarchy, moving towards more flexible ways of working, and really trying to use the same lens that we might use externally when working with other types of community groups or organisations internally within our own organisation. The second thing is related to that is it's really hard to know where you do actually hold power in the process, and what that power, how that power might influence the actual solution or where you get to in the process. And so it's really important to recognise, what kind of social capital, what kind of privilege, what kind of positionality or bias you might be bringing into any type of process. One of the other things as well is that we typically in this sector focus on scale. Everything that we want to do is really attuned to this idea of being able to deliver impact at scale. And typically that means you don't actually give enough time and investment into making sure something is actually working before you try and make it as big as possible. And there's real challenges in scaling something before it's ready to be scaled, and a lot of times most people haven't done enough testing or prototyping, and there's massive assumptions that people have still made that only get validated, years later, and that's a massive cost to the sector, and it's actually a real issue, and we need to de-risk that process as much as possible in future design work. So those are some of the key things that I would say about what you need to do and how you need to evolve. And then the final thing I'd say that I think is really challenging but really important is partnering in this sector. If you've got gaps in knowledge, if you've got gaps in capability, if you've got gaps in expertise, or just types of people that you need around you to help solve that issue, it's really important to bring them along in that process. That I'd probably flag, which is really trying to push the boundaries, I'd say, of where design thinking and design practices can really create social change, is from the Centre of Economic Democracy, and they're exploring what they call social movement investing, and they're trying to design for entire movements, and I think that's a really interesting space to actually try and think about how you can use similar design principles but actually build the entire infrastructure for movements to try and engage and explore how capital redistribution can happen differently, how we can explore different values around investment, and see how that really could push us towards a new type of economy that works for all. So, for example, we did a range of testing with different types of community organisations and social purpose organisations when we first started the Growth Impact Fund over a year ago, which was just designing the website, and we literally showed them a wireframe of the website and asked them to explore that in conjunction with them considering an application for investment. And we were able to co-create what a different type of website might look like. That actually meant stripping back a lot of content that we thought was relevant and appropriate for that group and for those types of individuals. Once we actually got a lot of common feedback that was saying, I just want really simple, clear, accessible ways to engage within an investment process, particularly when I'm starting out, and I want clarity around whether I'm eligible and what the application process is going to look like. So we really stripped back the entire website, but we tried to keep a relational, warm tone and a sense of inclusivity into our website branding and approach to maintain as much as possible, a sense of trust and relationships with those individuals, even in a digital context. So I think that's just one small example of how we've used human-centered design, and we continue to try and use it across our entire fund structure, which is no easy feat. So we've committed to that for the next coming years, to really focus on continuously learning and adapting as we learn more from our users and what they want and what they're looking for from us.
An example of how human-centered design can be used within user voice is demonstrated with the development of Family Context, a digital tool that helps frontline professionals in children's social care better support families by social finance. Here's Camilla Devereux, Design and Research Practice Lead at Social Finance, to tell us more about it.
Hi, my name is Millie Devereux, and I work at Social Finance as the Design and Research Practice Lead. Social Finance is a not-for-profit enterprise. We work with partners in the public sector, internationally and in the UK, to solve some of the most intractable problems. Today, I'm really excited to share some of the approaches that we've embedded at Social Finance when it comes to human-centered design. We have a small but really agile and nimble human-centered design practice. We bring together service design and design research to help our partners understand the lives of their users and build the best possible solutions that are built around their needs. Human-centered design is a really practical and repeatable approach to solving social problems. It involves two things. Firstly, it involves design, making something new in the world, and also this idea of human-centeredness. How can we understand the experiences, the motivations, and the behaviours of our end users? And how can we integrate that into the social programmes that we develop? Human-centered design is incredibly important to me. I've always been really interested in human behaviour and trying to understand what makes us tick. But fundamentally, if we just do research and it sits out there in the world, we're not able to actually put it into something useful, it's not going to be helpful for society as a whole. So I think that human-centered design is a really practical approach to ensure that the lives of our end users feed into the design of the social programs that we practice and use. I think human-centered design is absolutely crucial to everything that we do at Social Finance. And that's because people are at the centre of our work. Whether we are developing a new data tool for children's social care, whether we are trying to understand how to build a new outcomes fund to provide end-of-life care for cancer patients, we really do need to understand the lives of our end users. So we start off by asking the really big questions. What's the problem that our clients are trying to solve? What are the lives of our users like? Then we conduct some explorative research to get to the bottom of those questions. That can involve things like interviews, focus groups, and maybe some more participatory methods. Thirdly, we think really carefully about how we can collaborate with our users, with our partners, and with communities to design and scale new solutions to those problems. And lastly, when we are working at scale, we try to collect evidence and data of what the impact of our programs actually is. That enables us to test and iterate over time. One of the things that we often face is that this is a really new way of working for many of our partners, and it involves upending power structures and it involves rethinking the way in which programs have traditionally been approached. If we think about what human-centered design is really trying to do, it's trying to understand the lives of our users and ensure that that feeds into decisions that are made in a boardroom. But that's not always the way that things have been decided. So we have to work very carefully with our partners to bring them on a journey so that they might understand the work we're trying to do. So I think something that's really important is to use the principle of show, don't tell. We don't want to alienate our partners, we don't want to isolate anyone with the work that we're doing. It's really important that we use plain English when we're talking about our work, but it's also really important that we bring our partners on a journey. So one of the first things that we do is we have workshops with our partners and we try to tease apart what assumptions they might have about the problem that they're trying to solve. Once we've done that, we think about ways that we might test those assumptions out with real users. Maybe we need to collect more feedback from users. Maybe we need to engage our users so that they can understand the programs that are affecting their lives. We work collectively together to find out ways that we can do this and involve users at every step of the way. So the example that I want to talk about is the Wellcome Data Prize for Mental Health. We partnered with Wellcome on an exciting prize that would enable research teams and data teams to innovate and develop new tools to support research in the mental health space. Obviously, because we knew that the outputs of this collaboration were going to affect people who have lived experience of mental health challenges, we wanted to make sure that they were involved from the very start. So we set up a youth advisory network. This was a group of people who had experiences of anxiety and depression, but also experience in the research field and wanted to see what they could do to change the structures that influenced their lives. The Youth Advisory Network were really involved in the decision-making processes that set up the structure of the prize. We didn't just say to them, this is what you're going to do. We gave them the opportunity to tell us what they wanted to feed into, what they wanted to change. For instance, they were able to write blog posts and different communications as part of the prize. They were also involved in the selection of the teams who were actually part of the prize itself. This was a really exciting way to see how we can embed lived experience in the work that we do. Feedback that we got from members of the Youth Advisory Network was really transformative. It was a really meaningful experience for them, made them feel like they were being listened to. Additionally, the teams that were part of the prize actually embedded lived experience work in their own programs, so we can really see the ripple effect of this approach out in the real world today. And often it's quite difficult to actually show what the impact is because we don't have a counterfactual. We can't actually see what it would have been like if we didn't involve users really early on in the process. However, I think there are tangible examples that we can point to, and that usually involves when there's been the development of a new product, a new tool, or a new technical solution. And so I'd really like to talk through one particular example now, and that's Family Context. Family Context is a tool that Social Finance developed working with Leeds City Council and also with Stockport, and this work was funded by the local digital fund. We conducted user research that involved participatory research and also interviews with social workers, and we found out that it was really hard for social workers to understand the connections that children have in their lives. Which other authorities are they talking to? Which other agencies are those children engaged with? And who are the other people who are safeguarding those children? Without that critical information, it was really hard for social workers to make decisions for those children. So we needed to understand that, and then we moved forward to develop a tool to support them. The result was Family Context. This is a tool that enables social workers to see the different connections for each child. This enables them to make more effective decisions to safeguard those children. I think it's a great example of seeing the impact of this work out there in the world. Firstly, it's absolutely worth it. Sometimes we hear people say, oh, I don't want to get engaged in too much user voice work because it's going to be so time consuming, it's going to be incredibly expensive. And to that I would say, well, designing solutions that aren't built around user needs and reverting to that status quo is even more expensive in the long run because it's not as effective. So that's kind of the first learning and the first thing that I would say. I think secondly, we're in a really interesting space at the moment where we want to focus on our users and bring a user-centered approach to the development of solutions, but we can't forget about the system and wider systemic effects. So sometimes I hear people say, well, I think there's a tension between user-centeredness and also thinking about the system. And to me, that's a bit of a false dichotomy. One of my key learnings has been that you can actually do both at the same time. One thing that's really crucial is to ensure that you do explorative research during the discovery phase of your project. That enables you to understand the true scope of the problem that you're trying to solve, to map that system out, and then consider the roles of individual users within that system. There are lots of different frameworks that you can use to do human-centered design work. One of them is the Double Diamond. The Double Diamond helps us to think about when we're going out, exploring new ideas, trying to understand the scope of a problem, and then we're coming back in again, we're converging to identify specific solutions before going out and exploring those ones again.
In this section, we looked at the human-centered design approach for engaging with users and shared examples of how the approaches would be used in the context of user voice, with case studies from Shift Design and Social Finance. In summary, a human-centered design mindset combined with a design thinking process enables you to gain rich insights from users to build into your product, service, or tool. It encourages stepping into the unknown, testing, learning, and failing fast to gain insights for informed decisions and seeing what works best for different groups. Additional resources. If you would like to continue your learning of human-centered design approach, it may be useful to explore the following links below. You've now completed Module 3.2. Up next, Module 3.3, Code Production and Code Design.